Have you ever wondered how much brutal sacrifice is shrouded in shadow behind the radiant smile of a goddess? Or about the tiny lives subjected to violent intervention just to erase every trace of a forbidden love? In Hollywood, every breath comes with a specific price tag, from arranged marriages designed to mask true identities to earth-shattering scandals magically vanished beneath the veneer of harmless medical reports. To protect an immaculate image for these entertainment empires, the stars were in truth merely components in a massive profit-making assembly line, where chemicals sustained a fake alertness and forced sleep was administered solely to serve the next shift. Today, we reopen the indentured contracts and the raw truths buried under layers of brilliant makeup. Join me as we step into the shadows of Tinsel Town, where those immortal smiles were in reality scripts written through silent sacrifice. If you want to join me in exposing the naked truth behind the glamour, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the upcoming dossiers. 1. Judy Garland, the rose raised on chemicals. In the memories of millions, Judy Garland remains forever the wide-eyed little Dorothy singing a song of hope about a place somewhere over the rainbow. But in reality, behind the lenses of MGM Studios, her life held no magic. Hollywood at that time did not view Judy as a talent to be protected, but as a production tool to be optimized to an extreme capacity. The degradation began with her own body. To meet the grueling 18-hour workdays on set, the studio established a maintenance protocol for humans through chemicals. According to records in authoritative biographies like Get Happy by Gerald Clark, Judy was forced into a horrific cycle of medication since she was a teenager. Doctors hired by the studio prescribed stimulants, amphetamines, to keep her alert and euphoric during filming. And as soon as the studio lights dimmed, they forced her to take heavy sedatives. Barbiturates to coerce her body into an immediate sleep, preparing her for the next shift early the following morning. This control did not stop at medication. MGM was obsessed with an immaculate image, and Judy's weight to a fanatical degree. Every food tray brought to her was meticulously inspected by supervisors. She was frequently publicly humiliated for her appearance, branded an ugly duckling or a fat pig if she dared to eat more than a single piece of meat. These horrific psychological pressures sowed a permanent insecurity within Judy regarding her own self-worth. Later, through the accounts of her daughter superstar Liza Minnelli and post-production records from MGM employees themselves, the world was shocked to realize that Judy Garland's addiction was not a personal, moral failure. It was a product engineered by the system. Hollywood intentionally created that dependency to keep her in a constant state of readiness to serve. They needed a Dorothy who was always smiling on screen, even as that girl's soul was shattering from exhaustion and chemicals. The cruelty of the studio system toward Judy Garland is the clearest evidence that when profit reigns supreme, human dignity becomes secondary. Judy spent her whole life searching for what lay beyond the rainbow. But in truth, she never escaped the magnificent glass cage that the bosses had built around her. The control over Judy Garland's body and mind, while brutal, was conducted in the shadows of the studio. In contrast, other stars were dragged before the pyre of public opinion in broad daylight, simply because they dared to live authentically to their instincts. Such was the case of another saint who had the entire United States turn its back on her after a single love letter sent from distant Italy. 2. Ingrid Bergman, the saint burned at the stake of hypocrisy. In 1949, Ingrid Bergman was more than just a movie star. She was the saint of world cinema. With her ethereal face and virtuous roles in masterpieces like Casablanca and Joan of Arc, the American public had reflexively pigeonholed her into a mold of untainted moral purity. Yet that very extreme adoration became the iron cage that imprisoned her true self. When Ingrid decided to leave an unhappy marriage to follow her heart with Italian director Roberto Rossellini, Hollywood did not see it as a personal liberation. They saw it as a betrayal of faith. The fury did not stop at the tabloids. It escalated into a symbolic social purge. According to the 1950 Congressional Record Senator Edwin C. Johnson, publicly denounced her on the floor of the U.S. Senate, calling her a free love cultist and a powerful influence for evil. Hollywood, instead of standing by its artist, chose silence or abandonment to appease religious and conservative groups. Studios swiftly severed her promotional contracts, turning one of the most powerful women in the world into a pariah overnight. Ingrid Bergman's tragedy exposed a brutal reality in the Golden Age. A woman's ownership of her body and reputation belonged not to her, but to the public and the corporations. As long as she served the image, they expected she was a goddess. When she lived according to her instincts, she became a scapegoat on the pyre of public opinion. The crowd did not love the real Ingrid. They loved the illusion the studio had manufactured. Her years of exile in Europe were not merely an escape from the press, but the price paid for daring to challenge the unwritten morality clauses of Hollywood. Her story is proof that fame can become a life sentence when you no longer follow the moral script imposed by society. But if Ingrid was punished for living openly, our next character chose the opposite, staging a life play so sophisticated it bordered on madness to protect her glow. She was a mother who turned childbirth into a humanitarian PR campaign to deceive the entire world. 3. Loretta Young, the play of the child who never existed. In the dazzling world of the 1930s, Loretta Young appeared like a pure white lily. She was the embodiment of elegance, piety, and the traditional values that America worshipped. But in 1935, on the set of The Call of the Wild, an unscripted incident occurred. Loretta became pregnant after a whirlwind affair with her co-star, Clark Gable. At the time, Gable was married and Loretta was building her image as a devout Catholic. In the ruthless studio system, an illegitimate child was not a living being, but a business catastrophe that could liquidate an entire career and a studio's massive fortune. Instead of facing it, Loretta and her PR machine orchestrated one of the most intricate cover-ups in Tinsel Town's history. As her pregnancy progressed, she vanished from the public eye under the guise of declining health. She hid in a secluded house far from the prying eyes of the tabloids, waiting to give birth in solitude and fear. But the cruelty of the play only truly began after the infant's first cry. To protect the Loretta Young brand, she took a heartbreaking step. She placed her biological daughter in an orphanage. Months later, she returned triumphantly, announcing to the media that she wished to perform a noble deed, adopting a poor baby girl. That child was Judy Lewis, her own flesh and blood, who had to enter her mother's home under the guise of a rescued stranger. The pain did not end with the lie of lineage. As Judy grew, the unmistakable features of Clark Gable became apparent, especially his trademark large ears. To stifle any public suspicion, Loretta made a decision that in hindsight is chilling. She forced her daughter to undergo plastic surgery to pin back her ears while she was still a child. It was not a mere procedure. It was a violent intervention into a human's identity solely to serve a perfect lie. Judy Lewis lived nearly her entire life in painful doubt. In her autobiography, Uncommon Knowledge, she recalled the hollowness of looking in the mirror and seeing a stranger, even though the powerful woman raising her was her biological mother. Loretta kept the secret so tightly that she only admitted the truth to her daughter when Judy was in her 30s and only went public in a memoir published after her death. This sacrifice was called protecting a reputation, but from another perspective, it was the betrayal of the most sacred human instinct for the sake of survival, in a system that allowed no ripples on its glass-like surface. Hollywood taught Loretta Young that glamour must be protected at all costs, even if that cost was the truth of her own blood. Her performance was so successful that the world believed it for decades, a testament to the terrifying power of fixers in manufacturing a fake reality. Leaving the room of Loretta Young's sophisticated lies, we meet a man who did not choose to act in order to hide his private life. On the contrary, it was his intelligence and distinct worldview that made him the target of a power machine even more terrifying than the movie studios. He wasn't forced onto chemicals, nor did he surgically alter his child, but he was hunted by ghosts from the files of the FBI. 4. Charlie Chaplin, the king of comedy and the sentence from the shadows. We often remember Charlie Chaplin through the image of the tramp with his oversized shoes and bamboo cane, bringing laughter to millions during the Great Depression. However, in Hollywood, where laughter was also priced by obedience, Chaplin was a dangerous outsider. He was not just an actor, he was an independent filmmaker, a genius who refused to let the studios control his mind. And it was that very freedom that made him the target of a decades-long hunt for his dignity. In the 1940s, as political tides in America became more sensitive than ever, Chaplin's private life was weaponized. The 1943 paternity suit filed by young actress Joan Barry was more than just a sex scandal. It was a perfect setup to destroy an icon. In court, even though blood tests of the time scientifically proved that Chaplin was not the child's father, the jury delivered a shocking verdict: he lost. They forced him to pay child support until the child was 21. This remains one of the strangest stains in American legal history, where scientific evidence was cast aside for prejudice and spite. Beyond a civil lawsuit, declassified FBI files later revealed a shivering reality. J. Edgar Hoover, the powerful director of the FBI, viewed Chaplin as a dangerous man because of his progressive views and empathy for the working class in films like Modern Times. Hoover directly ordered the amplification of every scandal in Chaplin's life, using tabloids to smear his character, aiming to turn the king of comedy into a moral degenerate in the eyes of the public. The system couldn't jail Chaplin for his films, so they attacked his morality to strip him of the crowd's support. The climax of the tragedy came in 1952. While Chaplin was en route to London for a film premiere, he received news that the U.S. government had revoked his re-entry permit. This unofficial exile was a bitter end for a man who had dedicated his life to American cinema. Chaplin lived the rest of his life in Switzerland, carrying the bitterness of a land that once celebrated him, but turned its back when he refused to bow to political scripts. Chaplin's story is a reminder that in Hollywood, talent can take you to the top, but only obedience keeps you there. When your smile carries messages that frighten those in power, they will find a way to extinguish it with sentences from the shadows. If Chaplin was destroyed for being too intelligent and defiant, our next character is a tragic symbol of having her identity completely stripped away. She wasn't exiled. She was kept molded and turned into a defective product in an assembly line of sensuality until there was no way out. 5. Marilyn Monroe, the defective product of a perfect assembly line. We often remember Marilyn Monroe through the image of a white dress billowing in the wind, or her sultry red lips. But behind that radiance was a tragedy of painful identity dissociation. Marilyn was not a human being. She was a product manufactured by the 20th Century Fox assembly line of sensuality. She was forced into a mold until she began to loathe herself. According to notes from those closest to her, Marilyn would often stand before the mirror and speak of herself as a stranger. "She, Marilyn, is coming now." Or, "How does Marilyn look today?" The poor Norma Jean was swallowed whole by a monster named the sex symbol. Hollywood's cruelty toward Marilyn didn't stop at the studio gates. She was turned into a political commodity in the highest-stakes power games in America. Her connections to the Kennedy brothers' president JFK and Attorney General Bobby Kennedy made her a living archive of national secrets. According to declassified documents, Marilyn was surrounded by wiretapping devices from both the FBI and political rivals. Every aspect of her private life was dissected, analyzed, and used as a weapon of deterrence. The obsession with being watched and the pressure from the massive PR machine pushed Marilyn into a prolonged state of psychological instability. The studio system didn't need a woman with intellect or emotions. They only needed platinum hair that spoke cooing words. When Marilyn tried to step out of her own shadow to study professional acting or demand respect, the system retaliated by isolating her, labeling her difficult, and tightening control through sedatives. Her death in 1962 remains a massive question mark, but from a sociological perspective, it was the inevitable collapse of a component that had been drained of its value in the industrial line. She died in a room filled with listening devices alone amidst millions of fake admirers. Hollywood created a perfect Marilyn Monroe for the world to behold, but they abandoned a shattered Norma Jean behind her. Marilyn Monroe ended her life as a defective component, a silent ending in the grip of surveillance. Yet the tragedy of identity theft had a painful precedent decades earlier. This is the story of the first woman to hold the title of It Girl, an icon of freedom who was torn apart by her own naive trust and a filthy media machine until there was no turning back. 6. Clara Bow. The Death of Trust and the Rise of Filthy Media. Clara Bow was the personification of the Jazz Age, vibrant, rebellious, and refusing to bow to any hypocritical moral standards. She wasn't just a star. She was a cultural phenomenon that led every American woman to bob their hair and paint their lips into a heart shape. However, Clara's frankness and wild spirit became a fatal weakness in the eyes of Paramount studio bosses. To them, a star who was too free was a star who was too hard to control, and when an asset stops obeying the system, is ready to watch it be destroyed. In 1931, tragedy struck when the personal secretary Clara trusted. Most Daisy DeVoe stole her private letters and financial ledgers to carry out a shocking extortion attempt. When the case went to court, instead of protecting their muse, Paramount stood by as tabloids tore Clara's private life to shreds. The 5-cent papers of the time concocted stories of sexual deviancy and baseless debauchery, turning the vivacious It Girl into a pariah in the eyes of the public. The betrayal came not just from her inner circle, but from the place she called home. The studio calculated that the cost of silencing the scandal for Clara was far higher than letting her collapse and replacing her with a more obedient new face. The studio's indifference pushed Clara into a severe psychological crisis. Diagnosed with insomnia and a nervous breakdown, she eventually retreated from cinema, shunned by the industry she once sat atop of. Clara Bow's story exposes a brutal truth about Hollywood. Fame is a commodity with an expiration date. When the PR machine no longer wishes to protect you, the truth will be distorted by profiteers, and your trust will become the weapon used to execute your career. Leaving behind the tears and collapse of Clara Bow, we come to a man who resisted in a completely different way. He didn't need studio protection, nor did he fear moral sentences. He was the only one who dared to look the system in the eye and declare that prison was sometimes more free than the magnificent glass cage of Hollywood. 7. Robert Mitchum. The only free villain in the Hollywood prison. On September 1, 1948, a true seismic shockwave ripped through Tinsel Town. Los Angeles police raided a small bungalow in Laurel Canyon and caught Robert Mitchum, the star of iconic film noir classics, red-handed with marijuana. In the context of 1940s American society, this wasn't just an arrest. It was a media disaster capable of killing any top-tier career. RKO Studios, where Mitchum was under contract, fell into a state of absolute panic. They had already prepared several salvage scripts, a tearful apology, a story about being framed, or a recovery stint at a psychiatric ward. But Robert Mitchum chose a path that no one in Hollywood history had ever dared to take. He smiled and admitted to everything. While major newspapers like the Los Angeles Herald-Express ran headlines about the shameful stain on cinema, Mitchum nonchalantly walked into his cell as if strolling down a red carpet. When swarmed by reporters and asked about the feeling of being in jail, he simply dropped a chilling line. "It's just like Palm Springs, only without the riff-raff." This statement was a direct slap to the face of Hollywood's elite, those who indulged in debauchery by night. but donned the cloak of moral sanctity by day. Mitchum's defiance created an unprecedented sociological paradox. Instead of being boycotted, his fan base skyrocketed. The public, weary of perfect artificial leading men, found themselves drawn to his unapologetic honesty. Robert Mitchum had inadvertently proven that the power of the audience is sometimes greater than the control of studio bosses. He didn't need to play the good guy to be loved. He just needed to be himself. Internal RKO memos from that era reveal the shock of studio executives as they realized Mitchum's post-prison films were breaking box office records. This was the first time in Golden Era history that a stain became a selling point. However, beneath that defiance lay a brutal reality. The legal system and the studio had used Mitchum as an experiment. Declassified records suggest the arrest may have been a calculated deterrent against the liberated lifestyles of actors, but Mitchum turned their sentence into a joke. Robert Mitchum survived and became a legend because he dared to look directly into the corruption of the system and refused to participate in its moral theater. He proved that in a magnificent prison, like Hollywood, the freest man is sometimes the one who accepts sitting behind actual bars. Mitchum's audacity showed us that in some cases, accepting a sentence could bring more freedom than trying to cover it up. However, while Mitchum rebelled with masculine nonchalance, our next character challenged the entire system through her very existence. A woman who turned what was forbidden into a powerful manifesto, laughing in the face of every hypocritical moral standard of the era. 8. Tallulah Bankhead, the roar that challenged the glass cage. Tallulah Bankhead was not just a Hollywood star, she was a force of nature. Born into a powerful political dynasty, with a father as Speaker of the House and a grandfather as a U.S. Senator, Tallulah possessed the sheer grit to never bow to anyone, especially studio bosses. Amidst a Hollywood shackled by the Hays Code, the draconian moral guidelines controlling every act and image of an artist, Tallulah Bankhead lived a life of staggering decadence in plain sight. She was one of the few who dared to identify as ambisextrous, a term for bisexual at the time in the mainstream media. Her famous quip, "My father warned me about men and booze, but he never mentioned women and cocaine," was not a mere provocation, but a powerful manifesto challenging every norm of gender and sexuality. In her 1952 memoir, she spoke candidly about relationships with both men and women, drug use, and an all-night party lifestyle. While the studios tried to hide her, Tallulah stepped into the light. She became legendary for dropping shock bombs about sex and politics on live radio, leaving censors in a cold sweat. She didn't try to fit in, she tried to stand out. Her notoriety didn't destroy her career. It turned her into an icon of freedom, attracting a massive underground, following those also seeking an escape from the shackles of a conservative society. From a sociological perspective, Tallulah Bankhead was a revolutionary of personal liberty ahead of her time. She was living proof that even in a system obsessed with control, strong individuals could still create their own gray zones. She turned social outrage into a form of power, proving that not every scandal leads to destruction. For the women imprisoned in Hollywood's magnificent glass cages, Tallulah was the roar of a lion, reminding them that there was a way out, to dare to be yourself, whatever the cost. Tallulah Bankhead chose to fight prejudices openly. However, there was another star, also, a woman who chose the opposite, locking herself within a perfect fortress of her own making. She fought against the ghosts of her past and the haunting fear of being replaced, only for that fear to transform her into one of the most controversial figures in Hollywood history. 9. Joan Crawford, the lashes behind the glamorous fortress. Joan Crawford was one of the rare icons who managed to survive the transition from the silent era to the talkies. To maintain her standing at the pinnacle of fame for 4 decades, she had to transform herself into a warrior with a level of discipline that bordered on the extreme. Yet behind those power-padded shoulders and the defiant, wide-eyed gaze on screen was a shattered psyche. Hollywood had taught Joan a singular, ruthless lesson. If you are not perfect, you will be replaced. If you grow old, you will vanish. This obsession transformed Joan's home into a fortress of absolute control. According to the controversial memoir Mommy Dearest by her adopted daughter Christina Crawford, further corroborated by accounts from numerous former staff members, Joan suffered from severe obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, fueled by the crushing pressures of her career. She was known to beat her children over something as trivial as a cheap wire hanger instead of a wooden one, or force them into grueling housework just to maintain her rigid version of order. Yet a deeper look into this tragedy reveals that Joan herself was also a victim. She lived in an era when studios were ready to discard women the moment the first wrinkle appeared. To survive, Joan had to inhabit a star persona 24/7. She allowed no room for error, neither for herself nor for those around her. This domestic abuse was not merely individual cruelty. It was the transformation of pain and pressure from a patriarchal system where a woman's worth was measured solely by an unblemished facade. Joan Crawford fought against time with every ounce of her ruthlessness, only to eventually become a ghost within the very radiance she had labored to build. The severity of Joan Crawford was a form of self-inflicted tragedy for the sake of survival. However, Hollywood history marks another case, one where the system did not just stand by as a star collapsed, but actively turned him into a scapegoat to protect the entire film industry from the brink of a total boycott. 10. Fatty Arbuckle, the greatest scapegoat of Tinsel Town. In 1921, Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was the most powerful artist in the world, commanding the first $1 million contract in history. But after a single night at the St. Francis Hotel, his life was forever altered. A young actress named Virginia Rapp passed away following his party, and despite a lack of concrete evidence, Arbuckle was charged with manslaughter and rape. What is most significant is not the trial itself, but how Hollywood responded. At the time, cinema was being denounced by religious and conservative groups as the headquarters of depravity. Hollywood needed a sacrificial lamb to prove to the world they were cleaning house. They chose Arbuckle. Although he was acquitted after 3 trials with the jury even issuing a formal letter of apology, a permanent ban was enacted immediately. The studios destroyed his films and erased his name from history as though he had never existed. Arbuckle did not lose to the law. He lost to a ruthless PR campaign orchestrated by the studios. They needed a scapegoat to offer in exchange for the continued safety of their massive profit-making machine. Arbuckle's downfall marked the birth of modern censorship and the PR era, where truth matters less than what the public is led to believe. He died in poverty and isolation, a chilling reminder that Hollywood can create a god and can just as easily crush that god to protect its own bottom line. 10 people, 10 destinies, yet all shared the same script. They were components in a glamorous assembly line known as the Hollywood Golden Era. By peeling back these dossiers, we see not just scandals, but the scars of a power system that never showed mercy to the human soul. The golden lights of Tinsel Town are indeed magnificent, but they shine brightest only when fueled by the darkness of displaced spirits. Which figure on this list do you feel for the most? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe as we continue our journey to decode the buried secrets of cinematic history.